Hello. I think we're on, and I'm waiting for Marietje to join me on stage. Hi.
Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Marietje, Schaake. Welcome to Catapult Cloud. It's been an interesting day of online convening for trying to do something that is non-linear conversation about some of the situation that we have in our times, and also with the pandemics, but also holding space for conversation within politics, technology, governance, also consciousness and ethical and existential questions. So quite interdisciplinary conversations, and how we use those tools of technology and also capital to facilitate good solutions that is giving to this world instead of exploiting it. It's been I think it's since this morning's set time, and now I think our friends in San Francisco, I will also say hi to them. I think they're starting to wake up. I see the numbers on our participants is going up.
Great.
So that's interesting. You are working both places, both Europe and also on that coast. So you are the Internationally Policy Director of Stanford University in Cyber Policy Center and International Policy Fellow of Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, and President of the Cyber Peace Institute. That was a long title that I had to read. But you're also writing in Financial Times columns and for the Dutch NRC newspaper. And you're here to talk about your expertise. It's topics on politics and democracy and survivors in the time that we are in. But first, please tell us a little bit, because what I said was just a small piece of your professional career and your efforts. So tell us, please, a little bit more about your background and why you come into the technology space with such a strong, also political view or standpoint.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to join you, even though a personal joining would have been even better, but it's great to be connected to you, and I look forward to our interactions. Before I moved to the West Coast in the United States, I served in the European Parliament for 10 years. I represented a centrist Dutch Liberal Party. And one of my drives was to see how technology changes our world, but also to make sure that our fundamental rights, the rule of law, our freedoms and democracy are resilient to deal with the disruption. So I'm excited about innovation, excited about technology, but I do not think that the desire to make profits or the desire to innovate should go above the need to preserve democratic rights and principles. So that was an outlook that I had when I served in the European Parliament, and I applied to anything from trying to restrict the exports of surveillance technologies to ensuring that net neutrality was guaranteed in European law, or reforming copyright, something we were not as successful with as I had hoped. So I focused on a variety of topics and basically do the same now that I'm at Stanford, in the heart of Silicon Valley, close to the power brokers over there, which are private companies, and teaching students at the intersection of politics, policy, and technology. So I just taught my last class until 2:15 in the morning, European time, on AI and the rule of law from a global perspective. And that also gives you an impression about the things I care about. I care about the foundations of our quality of life, the rule of law and protections of our rights and freedoms, and want to see how we can make space for innovation and new companies while making sure that not everything gets disrupted.
Exactly. Let's talk about that a little bit, because in your circles now, when there is a crisis in the way that we see global, worldwide, across borders, in any possible way, it's a pandemic. We get sick, and that doesn't have any limitation for borders. There is also a need for technology, and we can use technology for good, for tracing and tracking this. What is, and you probably want to, with your engagement, probably want to like jump up and say like, okay, we can use technology and help. But there is some balances to be made also in your circles. What is the conversations now?
Well, when I listen to what I hear in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of high hopes of what the technology can bring. Artificial intelligence, for example, for pattern recognition of how the virus looks, how it behaves, and to maybe see whether existing medications could be a source of inspiration for vaccination or medication. So that's a very specifically medically applied way of using artificial intelligence. But in the more public debate and the political debate, I think in almost every country around the world now, we hear very high hopes of what a contact tracing app might do to contribute to allowing for more freedom of movement. And I'm sure many of you feel the same, that we're dying to go outside, more, and to have the ability to go back to school, back to work, back to the theater, back to the club. But now I think we see too much of a hope in the way in which apps could contribute to that. Almost a blind belief that, as long as we have a smart app on our phones and it would inform us when we've been in close contact to somebody who carries the virus, we will be alerted, and otherwise we can just go about our normal lives. And I wish it was that simple, but I don't think it is. So I think before we talk about privacy and security and the challenges to those fundamental rights and principles, we have to also ask ourselves, what is an app really supposed to do? And is it a reasonable expectation that this can be built in a way that preserves rights and freedoms? And I haven't seen a good model yet, even though many apps have been developed, used across the world, but often not in high enough numbers, and risking things like a false sense of security or a false positive. It's hard to see now, but I'm sitting in the middle of Amsterdam where people live closely to each other.
Yeah.
When my neighbors sit on the couch, they may be 2 meters away from me, but there will be a wall between us, so they cannot possibly infect me if they were to carry the virus. So what I prefer to see is not a blind belief in the technology and a sort of tech utopian view that as long as we have technology, it will be solved, but that we actually look at the societal challenges we have and how we need a complete scenario to get out of the lockdown, not just by downloading an app.
It's the combination, it's the holistic view on actually both washing the hands and also maybe using technology and this tracing solutions, but the balance of also having, well, technology can solve everything, but it's still like we humans that that interact, and it's our culture and understanding those what do you say, like this both side, the holistic approach to this in some sense as well. Okay.
Yeah, and we want to avoid that people lean too much on the promise of technology without taking their own responsibility. And another dimension we can look at is, for example, unemployment. A lot of people have lost their jobs, and contact tracing is also done by people, right? They call, they check, they inform others that they may have been at risk, and it's actually a more precise way of tracing contact. So one consideration could also be to have this done by people so that they can actually have a job instead of being unemployed now, partially as a result of the virus. So I would indeed prefer a much more holistic or multidisciplinary, as we could call it in academic terms, view where not only technologists and privacy experts look at this is very important, but we also would have sociologists and psychologists and people who understand how like in urban planning, people move through cities and what makes sense, to see what we're trying to achieve, what are the different elements to make that happen, and to see what impact it has on people. Because I think the idea of being followed or the idea of being traced, even if it is done with the biggest precautions for privacy and cybersecurity, it can really change people's behavior. In South Korea, the existence of these tracing apps has led to stigmatization because it was revealed where people may have contracted the virus or where they may have been, revealing very intimate details of whether people had an affair or who they went to the restaurant with or what they were doing in their most private moments. So the fear of being stigmatized for having the virus is now a bigger fear for a lot of people in South Korea than having the virus itself. just because the responses of people are so strong. So I think it's important to think about how we want to do this as free and open societies. And I don't believe that dogma without, critical thinking ever leads to very good solutions.
Oh, there are endless ripple effects that we can't really foresee. And how do we approach that? And what you're saying, that's for now, you haven't really seen those solutions yet. Where does it lie? Does it lie with the researchers and the conversation? Do we have a good enough language for this, or does it lie with the regular what do you call it in English, Joe, in the street, or what? How do we come to that place where we actually can use technology from that well-intended place that is not creating problem for us, but actually solving them and seeing that whole picture?
I think the starting point is that technology can support policy that's made by people, but it cannot replace it.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it's important that the average citizen trusts the technologies as an additional element to public policy. And that's exactly where a delicate balance needs to be struck also by lawmakers, because imagine overpromising about solutions, technological or otherwise. People can easily lose trust if it doesn't deliver. And that's hard at this moment in time, where governments need to work overtime to preserve the trust of their people, to help them navigate through these very, very challenging and unprecedented times. And so what we've seen in the Netherlands, it's the case study I've looked at most closely while I was here and while I was looking at what the government was hoping to do and then how hard it was to get there, is that there was, for example, a need to have massive testing capacities before the contact tracing app would really add much value. So without medical testing of infections with the COVID-19 virus, you cannot really track infections, right? Because if you don't know that somebody's infected, then you wouldn't know it with an app and you wouldn't know it without an app. So it's important to bring the different elements together and to, I believe, communicate with citizens in a way that is realistic instead of over-promising. And when you said the average person, that's something that I've learned in my 10 years in politics. I believe people can handle a lot more than politicians sometimes give them credit for. There's a real tendency to have all these positive messages and to almost over-promise, even though I think honesty now and realism is what people need. They know that these are difficult times. They know that we have to stand together and that there's going to be a lot of pressure on jobs and health facilities. But I believe they will give credit to governments and leaders that are willing to take citizens along instead of feeding them populist type messages.
It's an interesting, when you're bringing it up, it's an interesting that mix between wanting to encourage, wanting to spread hope, and wanting to, as from the politicians, and then you have the newspapers that is painting the other picture, and where are we as a citizen, and what choices do we make for ourselves? And I think that's the question. I know here in Norway, when we were, there was a solution that was presented to us, and one half, downloaded it, another half didn't. And I must admit myself, I was like, should I not? Well, we live in Norway, so, we could be fairly safe on at least our politician working on our behalves. And also regulations, but there is this place of not knowing. How do we as people take that choice? Do you have any tip for our viewers for that? I think we lost Mariette. I think it's a situation of reloading the browser again. Yeah, I have here on the chat that our producer is trying to ask Marietje to do that. It happens. It's Chrome is a good browser to use, and we have learned. And also reloading, or if you have a lot of windows up, that will also cannot take some of the capacities. Here we are, we're back again.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Normally the video connection is what I live on, so maybe it's a different kind of service we're using here. Sorry.
I'll let you in on a secret. Hopin is a fairly new platform, and I think they just started when also a lot of the physical in-person conveners were starting to look for platforms for taking their conferences and festivals and convenings online. So I think there's something there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is there any for us that is wondering, should I download this app or should I, or how? And also I think from my point of view, how can I help? How can my data actually support and help with the situation that we are in, and what would be my personal judgments back and forth to whether or not downloading something, an app like this?
So I think there's no one app. Every country, many companies do things differently. So it's important as a citizen, as a critical thinker, to ask yourself, do you feel comfortable about the privacy protections, about the way in which data is handled and stored, about the time limit of the use of this app? So for example, only to support medical staff in tracing contacts, but not as a precondition for boarding a plane or entering into a restaurant or getting an insurance policy. So this function limitation and having sunset clauses, so basically the app expiring unless there's a need to continue its use, are, I believe, very, very important to make sure that there's not a what we call mission creep. So an app may be designed for one purpose, but then if it starts to slowly be used for another purpose, there are new risks for privacy and security in many, many ways. So I encourage people to ask themselves, is this really helpful? And to think beyond what is promised, because of course companies who want to build these apps would like to see a big uptake. You know, it allows them to play a key role at a key moment, to gather very important data in large amounts, sometimes sensitive data. So the incentives on the part of companies are not so difficult to understand. The incentives on the part of governments, let's stick with democratic governments, because it would be a world of difference if we would imagine ourselves in non-free societies. And I do think it's important to see this also as a litmus test of our own commitments to data protection. It's almost 2 years since we have the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR in Europe. And it's been a really important landmark legislation that seeks to empower individuals and give them more agency over how their data is used. And so we cannot suddenly throw these principles overboard in the name of a crisis. In fact, I think that the GDPR answered in part to the previous crisis, that one after 9/11, where in the name of countering terrorism and fighting jihadists and other terrorist groups, a lot of civil liberties were eroded in a way that I think we're still paying the price for. So it's really important to allow for solutions that do not have to compromise on the foundations of our freedoms. It's not necessary, and I would like especially democratic politicians to be very mindful of what it is they are doing right now, because the precedent that is set in this moment will probably be with us for a long, long time. It's
one thing. Sorry. Yeah, I'll have to live with it. And all of a sudden there was a huge echo. No, it's one thing to wanting to help and to wanting to use these solutions, but then what do you call that? Like, setting the new precedents and then and reverse that is going to be the challenge here. I wonder if we have a little problem. Now we're live. I'm getting also a little bit messages back and forth here on that we were not live and now we're live again, but that's good.
Okay.
So what are the pitfalls or what are the largest democratical problems that you'll see, or that if you could like give one or two examples that you think that will be, let's not take that path. And again, probably have.
Well, I think Yeah, no, I think in general to normalize that people are being traced is a big one. And to give a lot of power to tech companies is another big one, because a lot of the concerns people have is that there's already excessive power without appropriate oversight, checks and balances in the hands of big private technology platforms, like Facebook, YouTube, and other such companies. So I think it is important that we, on the one hand, understand how much we rely on these services. On the other hand, we understand that they are governed and owned by private shareholders, private companies. And I would like to see, as a positive ambition, a rebalancing of this power dynamic, where the public interest gets reinforced, because the impact of technology on society, not just on the economy, but on society, is so clear right now. On the other hand, we have children spending time online, probably against what their parents would like to see. I mean, it's normalizing all this time spent online. On the other hand, how are we going to enjoy culture, the theater, concerts, without looking at the screen? So the patterns that we may have built to preserve our mental health, to preserve our energy levels, because I don't know if you've looked at the screen as much as I have over the past weeks, but it's really intense. I mean, so I think we have to, again, as I mentioned, around the apps, but also with the use of these services that on the one hand are like a lifeline, we have to critically ask ourselves, what does it lead to if we're just living online, if children are living online, if we're sharing all this data? Is that the society we want? So I hope that we will try to rebalance a lot of power that goes unchecked in the hands of private companies, and that we also stay aware of the impact that it might have on brain development, mental health, and the broader well-being of our societies.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, back to that human-to-human connection and that cultural perspective and our psychological, sociological well-being and existing, and you're absolutely right, being on a screen like this all day long, I think one thing is it takes some energy from you, but the other thing is like we're not getting that energy, like that human and human connection, which is purely existing between us, and the lack of that, what happens, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So so there is some big tech companies that has gone into collaboration lately. Do you have any reflection on Google and Apple's collaborations for now?
Well, it was a little remarkable that they started collaborating at all, but it may also say something about the incentives that they have to step into this space. I mean, both companies are already extremely powerful, and yet they wanted to enter into this space. Now, of course, there are a lot of people working in these companies who are deeply committed to doing the right thing for society and who want to help, just like all of us. I think so many of us are constantly thinking, what can we do to support others? What can we do to make sure that our society comes out of this better, and that we take care of each other a little bit? So on a good day, I would imagine that they wanted to help take care of other people. If I'm a little bit more cynical, I think they want to take care of themselves quite a bit. So we have to decide as democratic societies, what is the role for such big companies in this process? And I would say it might be a modest role of making sure that there can be a preservation of certain principles, like baked-in privacy, baked-in data protection and cybersecurity standards, questions of interoperability. So once there is a set of criteria basically set, that it allows for access by multiple others, and that it doesn't become some kind of new gatekeeping role that both of these companies are well familiar with. So I think it depends a little bit on how we govern it as well. So how we look at what they're offering, but rather also how we want to see the role of companies in our society, and not just imagine that they can sort it out for themselves, because their incentives at the end of the day are with shareholders and their reputation. And I would like to see focus on the broader societal well-being, on democratic oversight, for example, to also be strong when we engage these companies in such important
topics. Yeah. These are all huge questions, and they're so profound and so important, and I wish we could have so much more time to talk about this, because it's really the ethical, existential, societal impact of what is happening now will affect us, you know, many years, and will be defining our history, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's a pivotal moment. And so I'm very happy that you're addressing these issues and hopefully encouraging people who are online now to think critically about what is happening to us, not just medically, but also technologically, and what it is we want from this breaking point in many ways, right? Nothing will be the same. It's a huge moment of reflection. And I do think that also allows us for an opportunity to focus on what's really important for us and to make that stronger and not allow it to kind of be hijacked by a big corporate interest. So that's my wish, how we come out of this moment.
Thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, Mariette, and now your screen froze, so I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much.